As we all know, coding is becoming much more prevalent in this modern society of ours. And if you want to try to join in on the trend, what's better than learning a new programming language? This course will help you cover the basics of C++. Stay tuned. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of Mr. Encyclopedia. And today we're covering the basics of C++, specifically the basic C++ structure. It's the first episode of our C++ basics course, and it's very important, very vital, so to speak, as it's always important to learn the fundamentals first before you get into advanced topics. And you'll also notice that not only is this just going to be some simple course, it's also going to be the backbone throughout your whole C++ and throughout the rest of your coding journey, whether you're a professional coder or just a simple beginner who wants to learn his first new programming language. And so I'll take you on step by step so there's nothing to be afraid of, and moreover, towards the end, we'll do a simple project just to show a real life example of how C++ can be used. Okay, so first off, you need to have an IDE, so that's basically an integrated development environment. And here we have Visual Studio Code, at least I'm using Visual Studio Code, and I have a tutorial file open for .cpp, and that's the extension for C++. Okay, so now let's talk about the basic structure. So unlike in other programming languages, like Python for instance, as I've coded in it before, you can just write, let's say, print, so show. You can just write print hello world. That's just basically how you'd print in Python. However, C++, there's more to it than just that. So before you even write your actual line of code, you need to call in an imported library, or so, as I like to call it. So here we need to type in include iostream and make sure the include has a hash, otherwise it's not going to work. And make sure the iostream is in the less than and greater than symbol. Okay, so after include iostream, it depends on what type you're trying to use throughout the rest of the code. But for instance, usually you can also say, like, to print out something, you can just use this. I'll show you why there's an error in a minute, but you can just say std count, and that's the way to print out something in the terminal or wherever your output box is, and just say what you want and close it with another extension at the end. So if you don't want to always type in this std ... and you just close it the same way too, like std in a similar way, if you don't always want to type that, and since I'm not so used to that, I use namespace std, and make sure you type it in these exact same words if you want to use it. If you want to use the normal one, there also are tutorials that will cover the basic parts of it, but since I'm not so familiar with it, I'm using namespace std. And make sure you put a semicolon at the end too, because there's another thing in C++. Unlike other languages, some other languages do have it, but also in C++, you need to end it with a semicolon. That's how the IDE knows that you're trying to end this statement, right? Okay, so once you have this first thing formalized, finalized, you can have like multiple store libraries that you can call. Like, for instance, there's include math.h, and there are multiple more. I mainly just use iostream. Math.h is mainly for more mathematical purposes. Like, you can still do multiplication, division, like simple math in iostream itself. Okay, so this is like the first line of code. And since, as in any other language, you first start out with hello world, I'll teach you how to do that. So usually 90% of the time, and if you're especially a beginner, 95% of the time probably, you're just gonna type in the int main. And that's very important because you can call other things like outside of it, but for this class purpose, I'm just going to write stuff in int main, but be aware that you can do other stuff outside of the main. So to write your first line of code, you already wrote your first line, but to write your first project, so to speak, as in to type in hello world, what you need to do is, since we're using namespace std, remember how I told you you have to use like std count and end it the same way? So you don't need to use that. You can just type in count, right? And then you have to type in these two not left, they look like left arrows, but they're less than symbols. You need to type in both of them, because it's called like an operator, and it's necessary for C++, so that in order to compile the line of code and run it in a proper way that can print out that line of code. Okay, so let's say this hello world, and you just end it with an L. Also, if you don't want to do the end L is usually it's just good practice to do it, but it's also for like ending the line and moving on to the next line. So it's also okay to end with just a semicolon, right? But I just like to use end L. Okay, so we have your first ever project that you created so far. That's basically it. Like, it is quite a process, especially because it's C++, but no, you did it. Good job. So just do Control Alt N in mine, and it's gonna run. Hello. There, you got the output. Okay, so now let me just go over one more time, just a quick review of this basic structure, and then next time we will go over a project just immediately soon after I go over this review. Okay, so first, if you remember, as you should, we have this hash include iostream, and then we're using namespace std so that we can write it simply. I'm mainly familiar with namespace std, and that's why I'm mainly using it. And then you do int main, and since you don't just, I've seen it also goes for if loops, which we're going to discuss at a later time, loops. But in Python or other programming languages, you usually just say if there's something and there's another thing inside it, like, this main and there's the hello world inside it. You use like a colon, right? And then you call the rest. But in C++, curly braces are one of the most important tools that you can use, and it's also used for if loops. Like, you say if and you specify your condition, then you put the curly braces and type whatever you want to do in that if loop within the curly braces. It's not like a colon and then it ends. So that's very important to note. Okay, so let's see what our error is. Okay, yeah. I was like, hold up, but there's no error. So this is just how you declare the proper hello world function, and just to specify how this works. Like I mentioned before, count is the way to call. It would usually be std count, but since we're using namespace std, it's much simpler. You can just say count, and it's how we used to like print stuff outside in the terminal, as you saw over here. There we go. Okay, so as you saw over here, hello world. Okay, so now we're actually gonna solve a real life problem in C++. It's a simple problem just to get started on the basics. But before we move ahead, you may be thinking, well, why are we not covering the main words yet? And that's basically because I wanted to give you a feel for how the structure looks like in C++ to get you comfortable with it, and then we'll cover the main words and expressions. We're not using much over here, just like hash include. It's not that important throughout the rest of the code. It's only important to start it, And here you can see, except for count, which I talked about, other than int, which we'll discuss in the next video, we're not really using much keywords, and we won't, except for int, in our actual problem that we're just going to do just now. Okay. So, and since we're using int, I'll go ahead and explain it as we move on, but we'll start over again, just so that you can also practice if you have one, if you have an IDE. In general, if you're not able to download Visual Studio Code, it's much easier to do on Mac, but on Windows, you'll need to follow a step-by-step process that they outlined in Visual Studio Code's website, right? And if you have problems downloading it, it's fine if you use an online editor. From now on, it's not going to be as fast or as strong or as powerful, but it's still going to be really good. And in general, I used Replit, and I can personally say that it's been great lifesaver for those days when I had a problem just trying to start up Visual Studio Code. So you can just go ahead to replit.com. It's completely free, or you can use multiple others. I just used Replit. Okay, so let's get back to the video. And I haven't explained what the project was, which I'll explain right now. So using namespace std. Okay, so this project, like you may have done if you're programming in another language before, the first basic project is going to be to create two integers and adding them up, right? So you may be asking, well, are we giving input to the user? No, inputs are going to be in another video. I'll address them in another video, presumably the next one, or if I'm trying to give a special video for that, probably I'm going to give a special video for that because they're very important. The keyword and everything is very simple, but they can be used throughout the code, so I want to devote and technically respect it a bit and give it a personal video. So we're not using inputs on this one because we haven't gone there yet. We're just giving two values like to the code right now. And how we're going to do that, we're still going to need our int main. We always need it. And yeah, our first integer, we call it like this, just like how we used int main. We use int a, and you can generally give it any name. And obviously it can be in another, but except you need to know that it's case sensitive. So what that means is that it's either uppercase or lowercase, just like in it. I don't know if it may be different. It may be different in other languages, but in C++ at least, if you went on one case, let's say you create an integer named C, and this, keep in mind, this is the capital C, right? So let's say you specify it. So this I specify it, so int C equals 8, or you can just, if you don't want to add a value, you can just do this, but we're just adding a value for this case because you're adding two numbers. So let's say int C is equal to 5. Now, here's the good part. So let's create another variable. Actually, I'll put this int A. So that, it's the first letter. And then we have int b, which is equal to 6. So we're adding the two together to get the sum. And for that, we have to specify int result because int is integer, right? It's kind of common sense to realize that. And what's different from other coding languages, what makes C++ kind of special, and as well as some other languages too, I believe, is that you can basically, you have to specify the type. If it's a float, if it's a double, which I'll talk about, don't worry, in the next video, and also if it's an int, you have to specify that before you type in what you want. Otherwise, the code will not understand what you're saying. For instance, in Python, you just type in the variable. You don't need to say int a equal to. So it's another thing. And make sure you, like I explained before, make sure you're putting the semicolons, right? So I just got an error because me being me, I forgot to put in this, and it's basically going to say expected semicolon, right? So yeah. So now int result, obviously we're going to store the result in a plus b, and notice how I put lowercase a and lowercase b, right? So this is what I said about case sensitive. If it was uppercase a, you can see an error there, and it says identifier is undefined, and you're like, well, I already defined A, and then you stop and look at it, and you're like, oh, but C++, it's case defined, or case sensitive, and it only takes in however you define the integer, or however, yeah, you define the integer, you can only use it like so in the rest of the code. So if I said A over here instead, like capital A, then it wouldn't be an error because we defined it. So let's say we give an A, right, Aaron. We can say Aaron. Notice that only the A is capital, just like how we defined over here. If I didn't make the A capital in either one of these spots, like if I didn't make it here, or if I didn't make it here, there would be problems. So make sure that you're using it in the same way how you defined it. Okay, so now we have the result. So it's basically going to be a number. We know it's not a string value, or basically it's not like a word. And next what we're going to do is going to print it out. So 5 plus 6 is going to be 11, right? So that I use small numbers so that we can verify our answer is right. So if we use that same count to print it out, count, notice we're only using that because we said namespace std. Otherwise you had to do std count and end it a similar way. So count, and we're gonna print out the result because that's what variable result. And we're going to end it and L, general purposes. And for some reason, this Visual Studio Code, when I typed in just a semicolon, it didn't really work out as intended because there was some package installation issue. But keep in mind that if you're using if I fix that issue, it's still safe to use the semicolon, right? Just like how we used it here. I just don't know why it happened for string. So here, this is still gonna work. Count, result, and L. So what we're gonna end up getting is 5 plus 6, which is 11. Let's check it. Yeah, we got 11. So this works for any number. So we should know that there are value limits, right? There are different types of integers. We'll cover that in the next video. But there is a limit on how many numbers can be stored in an integer, where you later need to use a longer version of it, which we'll be discussing. I'm not revealing anything yet. But yeah, so here we get 106. 100 plus 6 is equal to 106. So that was basically a simple project. Now, it's pretty important, though simple it is, to get the overall gist of it. We're using the same simple C++ structure that we talked about before in the int main. We're using include iStream, we're using namespace std, and these are all elements that you'll find even when you write complex code, right? We're still going to use int as we move on in the courses. In this course, we're still going to use namespace std, at least I am. If you don't want to, if you're comfortable with the std count, you can do that. It's not really going to harm anything, but I like using it to save time, and like I said before, I'm familiar with it. And we're still going to use include iStream especially. And as we move on, we're later going to see us include other sort of libraries like math.h, right? So stay tuned for that. And yeah, and I know the project was adding the two numbers, but let's just see. I'm just going to show you the key or symbol, should I say, of how you can represent addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. So this is obviously plus for addition, say minus for subtraction, and for multiplication, it's going to be star. It's not like x, like a times b, right? There's no dot to represent the multiplication like you do in a mathematical expression or equation either. It's going to be a star. And for division, it's going to be a slash. Okay. So it's pretty simple. And there is a fifth kind of figure operation that we're going to discuss in a later video. And don't worry, the concept is simple. These are the four main ones in math, but we're going to discuss the fifth mathematical operator in the next video. And basically the next video is always going to be like the in-depth basics on how C++ really runs with its words, or its keywords and key phrases. Okay guys, that's it for this video. Thanks for listening, and if you watched until this far, congratulations to you. Now you know how to write your first project and your first line of code in C++, and basically just add sums together. And I hope you got a gist of how the basic structure of C++ works, and I hope you enjoyed this first episode of our basic C++ course, and be on the lookout for the next episode where we cover the key words and phrases in C++. Thank you for listening. Bye.